3,000 years ago, along the fertile floodplain of the Nile, a man rose who would carve his name into stone and memory more boldly than almost any other ruler in human history. He fought great wars, signed one of the first peace treaties the world would ever see, and built monuments that still stop us in our tracks. This is the story of Ramesses the Great, the pharaoh who tried to make himself eternal. Welcome to Crowns and Conquests, where kings rise and empires fall. Ramesses was born into power. The son of Seti I, he grew up in the royal court, trained as a warrior and a statesman. By his teens, he was acting as a commander. By his mid-20s, he was king. From the very first day on the throne, his rule would be defined by two things: war and spectacle, the sword and the stone. He inherited an empire whose borders and influence were constantly tested. To the north, the Hittites; to the south, Nubia; to the west, Libyan tribes. A ruler in this world needed not only military skill, but also the ability to project authority. And Ramses would do both in the loudest way possible. When Ramesses assumed power, Egypt was prosperous, but also stretched thin by imperial commitments in Canaan and Syria. Trade routes mattered, and the control of cities was both strategic and symbolic. Ramesses' early years were spent consolidating and advertising power. Temples rebuilt, statues enlarged, names chiseled into every monument he could commission. His building program wasn't just vanity, it was political theater, convincing the population and the foreign world that the pharaoh's hand remained steady and divine. The defining military episode of Ramesses' early reign was the campaign that led to Kadesh. In the early 1270s BCE, Egypt and the Hittites were locked in a struggle for control of the Levant, the rich contested lands of Syria and southern Anatolia. Ramesses gathered a massive force and marched north to reassert Egyptian influence. The Hittite king Muwatalli II replied in force. The meeting ground was the Orontes River plain near Kadesh, and a clash of chariots and empires was inevitable. Ramesses set out with 4 great divisions, each named for a god: Amun, Re, Ta, and Sutek. Confident, he pushed forward. But Hittite spies had sown deception. One of Ramesses' divisions was lured away, and suddenly the pharaoh found himself facing a much larger enemy force alone on the plain. Ramesses' personal account, preserved on temple walls, tells of a near disaster. Cut off, surrounded, his charioteer wounded, the pharaoh fighting like a single man against the sea of Hittite chariots. He rallies his guard, charges again and again, and in the moment his propaganda preserves, a turnaround begins.
I am like a lion. I did not allow them to take the spoil of Egypt.
But the truth is more complicated. Archaeologists and historians today read the evidence cautiously. Egyptian inscriptions are dramatically pro-Ramesses, designed to show the king as a heroic, almost divine figure. The battle likely ended without decisive victory for either side. Kadesh was a tactical draw. Nevertheless, it had enormous symbolic power, and it set the stage for a diplomatic breakthrough that would follow. After years of intermittent warfare, exhaustion and mutual interest led Egypt and the Hittite realms toward negotiation. 15 years later, Ramesses would sign a peace treaty with Hittite rulers, one of the earliest treaties still extant. This eternal treaty recognized mutual borders and promised non-aggression, an astonishing diplomatic achievement for the ancient world, in a signal that great empires could make room for one another through law as well as war. For Ramesses, the treaty was also propaganda. He would portray the results as evidence of his greatness. For both sides, it created a new balance in the Eastern Mediterranean. Beyond Kadesh, Ramesses campaigned repeatedly in Nubia to secure Egypt's southern borders and resources, gold mines, trade routes, and control of the Nile's southern approaches. He repelled Libyan incursions and maintained garrisons in Canaan, to keep trade flowing. These campaigns, though less famous than Kadesh, kept the empire functioning and secured his economy and manpower for decades. If war made Ramesses respected, his monuments made him remembered. His building projects are staggering in scale. Temples carved from cliffs, colossal seated statues, temples aligned with the sun. The twin temples at Abu Simbel, 4 colossal seated figures of Ramesses on the Great Temple's facade, were carved into the rock in the mid-13th century BCE and remain among his most famous legacies. The sun alignment inside the temple, which still draws crowds today on specific days, underscores his cosmic ambition. He also built the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, and expanded Karnak, turning stone into an argument for his divinity. These monuments were propaganda, burial, ritual space, and city boosters all at once. Ramesses presented himself as both king and God's son, the living incarnation of Egypt's cosmic order. He married Nefertari in a celebrated royal pair. His wives and children decorated temples at his side. He fathered scores of offspring and used royal marriages and titles to weave loyalty across the elite. Religion and state were a single machine, and Ramesses was its largest gear. Ramesses ruled for an astonishing approximately 66 years, one of the longest reigns in Egyptian history. As he aged, his monuments kept growing, yet time, mismanagement, and external pressures would eventually erode the empire he'd built. He died at an old age for the era and was buried with the grandeur he requested. His mummy, removed and rediscovered millennia later, helped modern scholars link the living pharaoh and records to the skeleton in the tomb. Even today, his name, Ramesses, Ramses, is invoked as the archetypal Egyptian king. His art, treatises, and temples continue to be studied, visited, and debated. Ramesses II was a warrior and a showman, sometimes one, sometimes the other, and often both. He reshaped Egypt's landscape and stamped his ambition onto the world. But his life also shows the limits of power. Even monuments crumble. Even glory needs diplomacy. If you could ask Ramesses one question, at what point in his long reign would you have stood face to face with him? What would you ask? Tell us in the comments. If you love this deep dive, subscribe for more long-form histories and join us next time on Crowns and Conquests.